It was a perfect sunny day in Napa Valley, California, where sprawling vineyards stretched like a painting and sunlight danced on the lake's surface. I, Emma Wilson, stepped out of my rental car with a simple plan: attend my little sister Sophia's wedding, put on a smile, snap a few photos, and play the dutiful big sister, just like I always have. The luxurious resort before me glowed with vibrant gardens and an opulent reception hall, its soaring glass ceiling reflecting golden rays. I took a deep breath, smoothing out my sapphire dress, the only one I thought fancy enough for an event this extravagant. I didn't want to stand out or make the day about me. This was Sophia's moment, and I was used to not being the favorite kid in the family. But from the very first moment, I felt a chill, and it wasn't the weather. As my car pulled up to the main entrance, a staff member in a sharp black suit opened my door. I gave a small smile, stepping out, my heels clicking softly on the stone path. I told myself I'd blend into the festive vibe, be a part of this big day, even if just a small piece. But when I walked into the grand foyer, where pristine white flowers were artfully arranged and crystal chandeliers sparkled like stars, a sense of unease crept in. A receptionist stood behind the counter, her smile as bright as the California sun. "Your name, please?" she asked, her voice warm and sugary. "Emma Wilson," I said softly, keeping my tone steady, like it was no big deal. Her smile faltered for a split second, but I caught it. Her eyes flickered with confusion, as if my name wasn't on the VIP list. She flipped through a thick guest book, her fingers moving quickly, then paused. Her eyes narrowed, and when she looked up, her smile was strained. Here we are. You're seated in the hallway area." I blinked, my brain struggling to process. "Sorry, where?" "Just outside the main ballroom," she said, her tone overly casual. "Near the coat check." I froze, feeling like someone had just dumped ice water over me. The hallway? By the coat check? I glanced at the seating chart nearby, elegantly decorated with gold embossed name cards. My parents, Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, were at the head table, right in the center of the ballroom, bathed in chandelier light. Sophia's best friends, the groom's co-workers, even distant relatives I'd never heard of, had seats inside, surrounded by clinking wine glasses and lively chatter. But my name? Nowhere to be found on the chart. Not a trace. "There must be a mistake," I said, my voice trembling despite my effort to stay calm. "I'm the bride's sister." The receptionist smiled again, but it was stiff, like she was reading from a script. "I'm afraid not. That's your assigned seat." My chest burned, a spark of anger flaring inside. I told myself maybe the ballroom was overbooked, maybe it was a last-minute glitch, a silly oversight, but deep down, I knew better. I turned and caught sight of my mother, Catherine, standing with Sophia. They were laughing, Mom adjusting the veil on Sophia's stunning wedding gown, her arms wrapped around her like the world revolved around that moment. Sophia was radiant, her blonde hair glowing under the lights, and Mom gazed at her with pride, a look I'd never received. I walked over, each step heavy, but I kept my voice even. "Mom, can we talk for a sec?" Mom didn't even glance at me, her eyes stayed glued to Sophia, to the veil, to everything but me. "Not now, Emma," she said, her tone sharp. "Can't you see I'm busy?" I bit my lip, something lodging in my throat. "Just 1 minute," I said, almost pleading. Mom sighed, an exasperated huff, like I was an inconvenience she didn't need. She stepped aside, but her gaze slid past me as if I were a ghost. Sophia stood there, her eyes meeting mine, her lips curving into a smile that held no warmth, a smile I knew all too well, one of quiet triumph. "I'm seated in the hallway," I said, my voice low but clear. Mom shrugged, like it was no big deal. "We had to prioritize close family, Emma. You know how it is." I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms. "I am close family," I said, my voice starting to shake. "I'm Sophia's sister." Mom let out a small ice laugh like a winter breeze. "Oh, don't make a scene, Emma," Sophia chimed in, her voice syrupy sweet but her eyes sharp as knives. "It's probably just a mix-up, sis. No one meant anything by it. Weddings are so hectic." But the way she tilted her head, the way she smiled, made it clear there was no mix-up. This was deliberate. I looked at Mom, clinging to a sliver of hope that she'd hesitate, say something to ease the sting, to show me I wasn't invisible. But she just sighed again, her tone dripping with reproach. "Don't ruin your sister's big day, Emma. You should be grateful you were invited at all." The word grateful hit like a punch to the chest. Grateful? Grateful for being shoved into the hallway next to the coat rack while my family celebrated in the ballroom. Grateful for being treated like an uninvited guest at my own sister's wedding. I forced a smile, but it was hollow, like an empty shell devoid of feeling. I turned away without another word, my heels echoing on the marble floor, each step pulling me further from the people I once called family. They expected me to stay quiet, to accept it, like I always had. But this time, a spark had ignited inside me, small but fierce enough to promise that things were about to change. I stepped out of the main ballroom, my heels clicking softly on the cold marble floor, each sound like a countdown to the storm brewing in my chest. The hallway carried the faint scent of wedding flowers, white roses and peonies meticulously arranged for Sophia's big day, but mingled with it was a sense of displacement, as if I were the one thing that didn't belong. In my hand was the card with my name, Emma Wilson. Table H, hallway area. The gold embossed lettering gleamed, but to me it was a sharp blade, slicing through the fragile hope that today, just once, my family might see me as one of them. I sank into a plush red velvet chair by a large window where Napa Valley sunlight streamed through, casting golden hues over the sprawling vineyards outside. The view was breathtaking, like a postcard, but it couldn't soothe the fire raging in my chest. My mother's words, "You should be grateful you were invited," echoed relentlessly, each syllable a stone hurled at my self-worth. Grateful for being relegated to the hallway, seated by the coat rack while my family reveled under the chandeliers. I gripped the card tightly, the smooth paper crumpling under my fingers, and then, like a flood, an old memory surged back, vivid and piercing. 3 years ago, I'd returned to our family home in Seattle for Thanksgiving. Sophia was off in Hawaii with her new boyfriend, leaving a rare quiet in the house. No loud laughter, no overpowering perfume lingering in the air. Mom asked me to dig through the attic for some old family photos for a scrapbook. A small task, but to me, it felt like a flicker of connection, a chance to belong. I climbed up to my old room, where everything was frozen in time. The twin bed by the window, the dusty bookshelf, and faded high school photos, most of them showing me alone, forcing a smile for the camera. I rummaged through drawers and found the photo box, but my eyes caught on a small drawer in Mom's vanity. Something made me open it. Inside was a soft brown leather journal, lying quietly, as if guarding a secret. I flipped it open without thinking, until the first line stopped me cold. Sophia's first day of kindergarten. She didn't cry. She turned, waved at me, and ran into class like the brave little girl she is. My heart raced as I turned the pages. Sophia loves the honey-glazed chicken I make for Sunday dinners. Sophia used to be scared of the dark, but she's so much braver now. For her 7th birthday, her favorite gift was the pink dress I sewed for her. Page after page, year after year, it was all Sophia. Every moment, every milestone, meticulously documented in Mom's careful handwriting, each word a testament to her love. I flipped faster, my fingers trembling, searching for even a single line, a single word about me, but there was nothing. Not a sentence, not a memory, not even my name, Emma. I clutched the journal, my knuckles white, the floor beneath me feeling like it was caving in. When Mom walked in, I was still on the floor, the journal splayed open before me. "You wrote all this about Sophia?" I asked, my voice small but icy, as if every emotion had been drained. Mom glanced at the journal and smiled faintly, like it was no big deal. "I had to write it down so Sophia wouldn't feel forgotten. She's sensitive, you know." I bit my lip until I tasted blood, the metallic tang sharp on my tongue. "What about me?" Mom looked at me, her gaze steady, unflinching. "You've always been independent, Emma. You don't need to be written down to be remembered." I nodded, saying nothing, but inside, a piece of me shattered. The part of my childhood that craved a hug from her, the part that hoped I had a place in her heart, the part that longed to be named with even a hint of warmth. That memory now came rushing back in the lavish hallway of the Napa Valley resort, as sharp as the chandelier light filtering through the glass ceiling. I was still Emma, the daughter Mom didn't think needed to be written down, didn't think deserved a proper seat at her sister's wedding. I stared out the window where guests mingled with wine glasses in hand and Sophia glowed in her dazzling wedding gown. The music from the ballroom drifted out, cheerful and distant, like it belonged to a world I'd never been invited to join. I set the crumpled card down on the chair, my hands trembling slightly. They thought I'd stay silent, swallow it, like I always had. But this time I felt a shift. Not an explosion of anger, but a steady, smoldering flame, promising I wouldn't let myself be invisible again. And in that moment, I knew today wouldn't end the way they expected. I sat there on the plush red velvet chair, Napa Valley sunlight glinting through the window, but it couldn't thaw the chill gripping my heart. The card, Emma Wilson, Table H, hallway area, lay crumpled beside me, a stark reminder that I'd never truly belonged to my family. The laughter and music from the ballroom echoed, vibrant and unreachable, like a world I'd been cast out of. The memory of my mother's leather journal, filled with pages of Sophia and not a single word about me, clawed at my mind. I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms, trying to keep the smoldering fire in my chest from erupting into rage. Then, a soft click from the ballroom door shattered the silence. "Emma," Sophia's voice rang out, light like a greeting but cold as a winter gust. I looked up. There she stood, arms crossed, her wedding veil fluttering faintly in the air-conditioned breeze. Her gown hugged her frame, its crystal embellishments catching the chandelier light, making her look like a fairy tale princess. But her smile, the one I knew too well, held no kindness. It was the smile of control, of someone who knew they held the upper hand. "You mad?" she asked, her voice dripping with mock sweetness, like she was talking to a sulky child. "About the seating?" I let out a dry laugh, the sound escaping before I could stop it. "No, Sophia, I'm not mad. I'm disappointed." She tilted her head, her eyes glinting as if I'd said something amusing. "God, you're always so dramatic. It's just a chair, Emma." "Who cares?" She stepped closer, her high heels tapping rhythmically on the marble floor, each step deliberately prolonging the tension. "You show up here in your pretty dress with your fake smile thinking you'll get some attention. But this is my day, not yours." I bit the inside of my cheek, tasting the faint metallic tang of blood. I kept my voice steady, though my heart pounded. "It's not about the chair. It's about how this family treats me. It's been like this for years. Always." Sophia shrugged, the gesture delicate but laced with contempt. "So what? You still show up, playing the perfect big sister, hoping mom will pat your head like a kid. It's pathetic, Emma." She took another step, her voice dropping to a whisper, meant only for me. "You're desperate for their approval, their love, but guess what? They don't need you. They have me." Her words were a knife, sharp and precise, slicing into the wound I'd hidden for years. But instead of pain, I felt a strange clarity. I met her gaze, unflinching. "No, Sophia. What's pathetic is that you have to tear others down to feel loved. You need the spotlight. Need everyone orbiting around you because without it, you're afraid you'd be nothing." She froze for a split second, her eyes flashing with surprise. But then, as if my words were beneath her, she laughed, a sharp, crystalline sound like glass shattering. "You really know how to ruin the vibe, don't you? This is my wedding, Emma. If you can't handle it, leave. No one's begging you to stay." Before I could respond, footsteps echoed from the hallway. My mother, Catherine, appeared, her face tight with irritation, like she'd been dragged from the party to deal with an unwanted problem. She wore a sleek silver silk dress, her hair swept up elegantly, but her eyes, the ones I'd once searched for a hint of warmth, skimmed over me before settling on Sophia. "What's going on here?" she asked, her tone heavy with reproach. As if I were the source of all chaos, I took a deep breath, standing tall, determined to deserve an answer. "Mom, I'm seated in the hallway. I'm not some distant acquaintance or random guest. I'm your daughter." Mom frowned, then forced a tight smile like I was blowing a minor issue out of proportion. "Emma, it's not that I don't value you, but the ballroom has limited space. We had to prioritize closer connections." Her words hit harder than Sophia's, a gut punch that stole my breath. I stood frozen, my throat tightening. "Closer connections? To Sophia?" Mom answered quickly, as if she'd rehearsed it. "Aunt Margaret, Sophia's college friends, people who've been there for her when she needed them. You've always been independent, Emma. I never had to worry about you." I let out a small, sharp laugh, bitter and surprising even to myself. "You didn't have to worry about me, and you think that justifies treating me like I don't exist?" Sophia jumped in, her voice sugary but laced with thorns. "Come on, Emma, don't make a big deal out of this. You should be grateful you were even invited. Not everyone gets to attend a wedding like this." Her words poured fuel on the fire inside me. I looked at Mom, clinging to a faint hope that she'd say something, anything, to show I wasn't invisible. But she just sighed, her eyes heavy with the duty of a mother trying to keep the peace. "Don't ruin your sister's day, Emma. Don't make this complicated." I stood there in the opulent hallway, feeling the world shrink to a single crushing truth. I'd never truly been part of this family. But then, a figure emerged from the ballroom, cutting through the tension like a blade. It was James Harper, the groom, in a tailored tuxedo with his tie slightly loosened, his brown hair tousled as if he'd run a hand through it in stress. He held a champagne flute, but his eyes, when they landed on me, weren't curious or surprised. They were filled with a quiet, unmistakable concern. "Emma," he said, his voice low, each word measured. "I overheard some of this. What's going on?" Sophia spun around, her fake smile snapping back into place. "Oh, James, it's nothing. Emma's just blowing the seating arrangement out of proportion. You know how sensitive she is." But James didn't look at Sophia. His gaze stayed on me, searching for a truth he wasn't ready to face. "Emma, is that true? They put you in the hallway?" I nodded, my voice steady but slow. "Yeah, hallway, by the coat check. That's my spot for my sister's wedding." James's brow furrowed, his grip tightening on the champagne glass. He turned to Sophia, his tone low but sharp. "Why? She's your sister, Sophia. Who made that call?" The air grew heavy, as if the hallway itself was holding its breath. Sophia let out a nervous laugh, but for the first time I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes. "It wasn't me, James. It was the wedding planners. They handle the seating. I don't control that." James wasn't buying it. He stepped closer, his eyes locked on her. "Really? Because I reviewed the guest list. I specifically asked for Emma to be at the family table. Who changed it?" The silence was suffocating. Sophia opened her mouth, but no words came out. My mother, standing there, fidgeted with her purse strap, her composure unraveling. "James, it's probably just a mix-up," she said, her voice shaky. "We don't need to make a scene." But James shook his head, his gaze still fixed on Sophia. "No, Catherine, this isn't a mix-up, and I want the truth." My heart pounded, not from anger, but from the surreal feeling that for the first time someone saw me, truly saw me. James wasn't just asking about a seat. He was questioning something bigger, something he was starting to doubt. And in that moment, I knew a door to Sophia's deeper secrets had cracked open. The hallway of the Napa Valley resort felt frozen, the air thick with tension. James Harper, the groom, kept his eyes locked on Sophia, demanding an answer she couldn't dodge. The cheerful music from the ballroom drifted faintly, but here, between us, there was only a taut silence, like a string about to snap. Sophia stood rigid, her fake smile crumbling, a flash of panic in her eyes. My mother, Catherine, clutched her purse strap, trying to defuse the situation. "James, it's just a mistake," she repeated, her voice trembling, but James shook his head, his focus unwavering. "I want the truth," he said, his voice low but cutting like a knife. Before Sophia could respond, another voice sliced through the air like lightning. "If you want the truth, James, maybe you should take a look at this." We turned. Eleanor Harper, James's mother, stepped forward from the hallway's shadows, holding a phone, her eyes sharp enough to cut through any facade. She wore a deep emerald silk gown, her platinum hair swept up, her presence commanding enough to make the grand hallway feel small. She moved deliberately, each step carrying the weight of an approaching storm. Sophia froze, her gaze darting from James to Eleanor, and for the first time I saw her tremble, if only for a fleeting moment. "What is this, Mom?" James asked, his voice low, a mix of unease and curiosity. Eleanor handed him the phone, her eyes never leaving Sophia. "Look for yourself, son, and decide who your fiancé really is." James took it, his fingers swiping across the screen. His brows knitted, then his face froze. I was close enough to see his hand shake slightly as he scrolled. I couldn't see the content, but his expression, shifting from confusion to anger, then to a deep, raw pain, said everything. He looked up at Sophia, his voice breaking. You wrote this?" Sophia's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She stepped back, clutching her veil like it was the only thing holding her together. "James, let me explain," she finally managed, her voice high and desperate. "It was just a joke between friends. It's not real." Eleanor let out a dry ice laugh, sharp and brief. "A joke? So, Sophia, you texting your best friend that you're training James to be the perfect husband was a joke? That he's too predictable, and all you had to do was play sweet in front of me to get the Harper family estate?" The hallway seemed to hold its breath. I watched Sophia's face drain of color, her lips pressed tight. But Eleanor wasn't done. Her voice remained steady, each word a precise strike. "And what about the message to your stylist? saying that a few months after the wedding, you'd make James so dependent on you that everything would be mine. That was a joke too? James shook his head as if he couldn't fathom what he was hearing. Sophia, tell me the truth. Is this real? Sophia trembled, her eyes darting around like a trapped animal searching for an escape. James, you know I love you. Those texts, they were taken out of context. I was just joking with friends. I swear. But her voice faltered, unconvincing, and for the first time her gaze couldn't meet his. My mother, who'd been silent until now, finally spoke, her voice frail. Sophia, you didn't do this, right? Tell me it's not true. But her eyes, usually brimming with pride for Sophia, were now clouded with confusion and doubt. I stood still, saying nothing, but a part of me felt an unexpected relief. Not because Sophia was being exposed, but because for the first time, the truth, the one I'd always sensed but never dared voice, was coming to light. I watched James, his knuckles white as he gripped the phone. Mom, how did you get these messages? He asked, his voice hoarse. Eleanor answered, her tone calm but unrelenting. A friend of mine works at the studio where Sophia hired her stylist. They accidentally sent me a backup file of her messages when I rescheduled a dress fitting. I didn't plan to read them, but when I saw your name, I couldn't ignore it. And I'm glad I didn't. Sophia shook her head, tears streaming down her face, smudging her flawless makeup. James, you have to believe me. I didn't mean it. I love you. Everything was for our future. But James didn't respond. He looked at her, his eyes a mix of pain and disillusionment, as if the woman before him was no longer the Sophia he'd loved. Our future? He echoed, his voice barely above a whisper. You called my mom a rich old lady who just signs checks. You said I was easy to manipulate. That's the future you wanted? Sophia's mouth opened, but no words could undo the damage. I glanced at my mother, seeing her frozen hand over her mouth, as if realizing for the first time that her golden child wasn't the saint she'd always believed. But then, out of nowhere, Sophia spun toward me, her eyes blazing. It was you, wasn't it? She screamed, pointing at me. You said something to them. You've always been jealous of me, always trying to ruin everything I have. This was your plan, wasn't it? I was stunned, not by the accusation, but by the desperation in her voice. I kept my tone even, though my heart raced. No, Sophia, I didn't have to do anything. The truth came out on its own. Sophia shook, tears spilling, but her eyes burned with hatred. You think you've won? You think you can steal everything from me just because you were never loved like I was? Eleanor stepped forward, placing a hand on James's shoulder, her gaze fixed on Sophia like she was seeing a stranger. Enough, Sophia. You can't blame Emma for what you've done. But Sophia didn't stop. She lunged toward me, her hand raised as if to slap me. But James was faster, stepping between us. Don't, he said, his voice ice cold. Don't make this worse. Sophia froze, breathing heavily, her veil askew, her blonde hair a tangled mess. The hallway fell silent, save for the distant music from the ballroom. Then, from the end of the corridor, another figure appeared. My father, David, approached, his face weighed down with a heaviness I'd never seen. I didn't know who'd called him, but his eyes, as they moved from Sophia to me, carried a sadness that felt unfamiliar. What's going on here? He asked, his voice low but commanding. Eleanor turned to him, her tone steady. David, I think you need to know the truth about your daughter, and I'm afraid it's not as pretty as you thought. The room was deathly still, as if the world itself had stopped breathing. My father, David, had just asked, his voice heavy as lead. What's going on here? His gaze shifted from Sophia, pale and trembling, clutching her veil, to Eleanor Harper, who stood tall, her presence sharp as a blade. James, the groom, still gripped the phone, the texts revealing Sophia's true self like knife wounds in the air. My mother, Catherine, stood frozen, hand over her mouth, her eyes a mix of shock and doubt, as if seeing her beloved daughter in a new, unflattering light. And I, Emma Wilson, stood there, my heart pounding, not from fear, but from the sense that this moment would change everything. Eleanor faced my father, her voice calm but uncompromising. David, you need to know the truth about your daughter, and I'm afraid it's not as beautiful as you've believed. She held up the phone, its screen casting a faint glow on her face, highlighting her piercing eyes. These messages, sent by Sophia to her friends and stylists, show she doesn't love James. She's after your family's wealth. She called me a rich old lady who signs checks, said James was easy to manipulate, and planned to make him dependent to take everything. Sophia shook her head frantically, tears streaming, smudging her meticulously applied makeup. No, it's not true, she screamed, her voice breaking, almost desperate. James, you have to believe me. Those texts were misunderstood. I was just joking with friends. I love you, I swear. But her voice was thin, fragile, like a dry leaf caught in the wind. James looked at her, his eyes no longer filled with the pain from moments ago, but with a cold resolve. He slowly set the phone on the table, his hand still trembling slightly. Sophia, you say you love me, he said, his voice so low it was almost a whisper. But you texted your friend that after the wedding, you'd find ways to control me. You called me an easy mark. That's love? My mother stepped forward, her voice trembling. Sophia, you didn't do this, did you? Tell me it's not true. But her eyes, once filled with unwavering pride for Sophia, now wavered, as if she were desperately clinging to the image of the perfect daughter she'd built in her mind. Sophia turned to her, eyes red and brimming with tears. Mom, you know me. I would never do that. It's them. She pointed at me, her voice shrill with hatred. It's Emma. She's been jealous of me since we were kids, always trying to sabotage me. She said something to Eleanor, set this whole thing up to ruin my wedding. I stood there, a wave of emotion surging inside me. Sophia's accusation didn't surprise me. I was used to being the scapegoat. But this time, I wouldn't stay silent. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice steady despite my racing heart. Sophia, I didn't have to do anything. What you wrote, what you did, speaks for itself. I'm not jealous. I'm just tired of living in your shadow while this family pretends I don't exist. My father, who'd been quiet until now, finally spoke. His voice was low, but carried a rare weight. Emma, he said, and for the first time in years he looked me in the eyes. You're right, and I'm sorry. The room seemed to freeze. My mother gasped, her hand tightening over her mouth, her eyes darting between my father and me. Sophia stood stunned, her mouth open but silent. I stood there, breathless, not from anger, but from the unexpected validation from my father, something I'd never dared dream of. I've been silent too long, he continued, his voice rough with emotion. I let things spiral out of control, let you bear the brunt of it, and I know you're right about Sophia, about everything. Sophia snapped out of her daze as if slapped. You're siding with her? She screamed, her voice breaking. I'm your daughter, the one you've always loved. How can you turn your back on me over a few stupid texts? James stepped forward, his eyes now devoid of hesitation. Don't call them stupid, Sophia, he said, his voice ice cold. That's who you really are. You don't love me. You love what I have, money, status, my family, and I was too blind to see it. Sophia shook, tears streaming, but her eyes still burned with defiance. You don't understand, James. I did everything for our future. I just wanted a good, stable life. What's wrong with that? Eleanor cut in, her voice sharp as a blade. Stable? By deceiving my son? By planning a divorce before you even married? I saw the message you sent to your lawyer, Sophia. You asked about dividing assets after you ended things with James. That's your idea of stable? The room fell deathly silent. My mother stumbled back, clutching her chest as if struck. Sophia, she whispered, her voice breaking. You really did that? Sophia didn't answer. She stood there, breathing heavily, her eyes darting like a cornered animal. Then, suddenly, she lunged at me, her hand raised as if to strike. This is all your fault, she screamed, her voice ragged. If you weren't here, if you didn't ruin everything, today would have been perfect. But I didn't flinch. I wasn't afraid. And before her hand could reach me, James stepped between us, grabbing her wrist. Enough, Sophia, he said, his voice like steel. Don't make this worse. Sophia yanked her arm free, staggering back, her veil askew, her blonde hair a tangled mess. She looked around, from James to Eleanor, to my father, then to my mother, searching for someone, anyone, to take her side. But no one spoke. My mother, who'd always defended her every mistake, stood there, eyes red, hands trembling. Sophia, she said, her voice barely audible. I can't believe this. Sophia laughed, a bitter, almost unhinged sound. This whole family, you're all against me. Because of her. She pointed at me, her eyes blazing. She's nothing. A nobody who's always been on the sidelines, always jealous, always trying to steal my spotlight. I looked at her, not with anger, but with a cold clarity. I don't need your spotlight, Sophia, I said, my voice slow and deliberate. I just wanted to be treated like a person, like part of this family. But you and Mom decided I didn't deserve that. The air was thick, every breath in the room heavy with tension. And then, from the doorway, a new voice broke through, soft but commanding. "If this is how this family operates, I think we need to have a serious talk." It was Aunt Margaret, Sophia's aunt, who rarely showed up to family gatherings but was always mentioned by my mother as a close confidant. She stood there in an elegant gray dress, her eyes sweeping over each of us, finally settling on Sophia. The room remained frozen, as if the world itself was holding its breath. My father, David, had just demanded answers, his voice heavy with authority. "What's going on here?" His gaze moved from Sophia, pale and trembling, clutching her veil, to Eleanor Harper, whose commanding presence seemed to sharpen the air. James, the groom, still held the phone, its damning texts exposing Sophia's true intentions like open wounds. My mother, Catherine, stood rigid, hand over her mouth, her eyes flickering with shock and doubt, as if seeing her beloved daughter in a harsh new light. And I, Emma Wilson, stood there, heart pounding, not from fear, but from the realization that this moment was a turning point. Eleanor faced my father, her voice steady and unyielding. "David, you need to know the truth about your daughter, and I'm afraid it's not as lovely as you've believed." She raised the phone, its screen casting a faint glow on her face, accentuating her piercing gaze. These messages, sent by Sophia to her friends and stylist, prove she doesn't love James. She's after your family's wealth. She called me a rich old lady who signs checks, said James was easy to manipulate, and planned to make him dependent to take everything. Sophia shook her head frantically, tears streaming, ruining her carefully applied makeup. "No, it's not true," she cried, her voice breaking with desperation. "James, you have to believe me. Those texts were misunderstood. I was just joking with friends. I love you, I swear." But her voice was thin, fragile, like a brittle leaf caught in a storm. James looked at her, his eyes no longer clouded with pain but hardened with resolve. He set the phone down on the table, his hand still trembling slightly. "Sophia, you say you love me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But you texted your friend that after the wedding you'd find ways to control me. You called me an easy mark. That's love?" "Aunt Margaret?" Sophia whispered, her voice a mix of hope and fear. Margaret stepped forward, her tone steady but firm. "I heard everything, Sophia, and I saw those messages your friend accidentally sent them to me. You might fool others, but you can't fool the truth. And Emma," she turned to me, her eyes softening, "you don't deserve any of this." And I stood there, my breath catching, not from pain, but from the overwhelming sense of being seen, not just by James, not just by my father, but by someone I'd never expected to take my side. Sophia, now utterly alone, looked around, her breathing ragged. And then, with a choked scream, she shoved past Margaret, storming out of the hallway, her lavish wedding gown trailing behind like a shattered streak of light. The ballroom doors swung open, and the cheerful music was drowned out by the furious clatter of her heels. I knew this wasn't the end. What was about to unfold in the ballroom, in front of hundreds of guests, would be a climax no one, not even Sophia, could control. Sophia burst out of the hallway, her extravagant wedding gown sweeping behind her like a broken comet, the clack of her heels on the marble floor echoing like a fateful drumbeat. The ballroom doors flew open, and the joyful music, sweet violin strains meant for her big day, was abruptly overshadowed by her gasping breaths and wild appearance. I stood in the hallway, my heart pounding, not from fear, but from the certainty that what was coming would shatter the perfect facade Sophia had so carefully constructed. James, Eleanor, my father, and my mother followed behind, none of us stopping her, none of us wanting to. This was Sophia's stage, and she'd chosen to step onto it. The ballroom where hundreds of guests were clinking wine glasses, laughing and snapping photos against a backdrop of pristine white flowers, fell silent. Heads turned, glasses paused mid-air, and smiles faded as Sophia appeared in the center. Her hair was a mess, her veil lopsided, her eyes red and streaked with mascara. The gown that had once drawn gasps of admiration now seemed heavy, dragging her down. She stood there panting, her gaze sweeping the crowd like a wounded animal searching for escape. Then she screamed, her voice echoing over the glittering tables and crystal chandeliers. "You think you can humiliate me like this?" Sophia shrieked, her voice raw with both fury and desperation. "I poured everything into this day, months of planning, choosing every flower, every glass to make it perfect. And now, because of a few texts, a few stupid words, you want to destroy me?" The ballroom was still, the air thick with shock. Guests exchanged glances, some whispering, others setting down their drinks, their expressions a mix of curiosity and disbelief. An older woman, likely a friend of my mother's, shook her head, hand over her mouth. Sophia's friends, the ones who'd once fawned over her like she was royalty, stood frozen, their eyes averted. Whispers rippled through the crowd, like waves lapping at a shore, and I knew Sophia's story would no longer be confined to the hallway. James stepped forward, his movements slow but resolute, his tuxedo still pristine despite the loosened tie. He stopped a few feet from Sophia, his eyes no longer pained, only clear and cold. "No one's destroying you, Sophia," he said, loud enough for the room to hear. "You did that yourself. Those texts, your plans, they're not anyone else's fault." Sophia shook her head frantically, tears spilling, distorting her once flawless face. "You love me, James," she cried, her voice shattering like glass. "I did everything for our future. You can't turn your back on me over a few careless words." Eleanor moved to stand beside her son, her gaze sharp as a blade. "Future?" she echoed, her voice icy. "You call plotting to seize my family's estate a future? Calling me a rich old lady and my son easy to manipulate? That's love. Sophia, you didn't want to be part of this family. You wanted what we have." A soft "oh" rippled through the crowd, like a breeze through the vineyards outside. The guests were piecing it together, their expressions shifting from shock to judgment. An older man, perhaps a colleague of James's, shook his head, muttering to the person next to him. One of Sophia's friends bowed her head, unable to meet her gaze. Sophia spun around, her eyes wild, and then she saw me, standing near the ballroom entrance. "It's you!" she screamed, pointing at me, her trembling finger accusing. "Emma, you did this. You've always been jealous, always trying to drag me down. You made this up, poisoned everyone against me. You wanted to steal my wedding, steal everything from me." The crowd's murmurs grew louder, eyes turning to me, some curious, others skeptical. I felt their stares, but I wasn't afraid. I stepped forward, my heels clicking softly on the floor, the chandelier light catching the sapphire of my dress, making me stand out in the sea of guests. I stopped a few feet from Sophia and met her gaze. "I didn't need to steal anything from you, Sophia," I said, my voice clear and steady, carrying across the room. "I didn't need to bring you down. The truth is heavier than any accusation you can throw." Sophia stood frozen, her breaths ragged, as if my words had struck her deepest vulnerability. The crowd went quiet, waiting. Then, from behind, my mother stepped forward, her steps unsteady, as if fighting to keep herself upright. "Sophia," she said, her voice small and broken, Did you really do those things?" Sophia whipped around, her eyes a mix of desperation and rage. "Mom, you're turning on me too. You, who always said I was everything to you, are siding with Emma?" Margaret?" Sophia whispered, her voice trembling with both hope and dread. Margaret stepped closer, her tone measured but unyielding. "I heard it all, Sophia. And I saw those messages. Your friend sent them to me by mistake. You might deceive others, but you can't deceive the truth. And Emma," she turned to me, her gaze softening, "you don't deserve to be treated like this." I stood there, my throat tight, not from pain, but from the overwhelming realization that I was finally being seen, not just by James or my father, but by someone I'd never expected to stand up for me. Sophia, now completely isolated, scanned the room, her breathing erratic. And then, with a strangled cry, she shoved past Margaret, storming out of the hallway, her lavish gown trailing like a fading spark. The ballroom doors swung open, and the joyful music was drowned out by the furious clatter of her heels. I knew this wasn't the end. What was about to unfold in the ballroom before hundreds of guests would be a reckoning no one, not even Sophia, could control. Sophia burst into the ballroom, her extravagant gown sweeping behind her like a broken comet, her heels clacking on the marble floor like a drumroll of fate. The doors flew open, and the sweet violin music meant for her perfect day was overtaken by her ragged breaths and wild appearance. I stood in the hallway, my heart racing, not from fear, but from the certainty that the perfect image Sophia had crafted was about to collapse. James, Eleanor, my father, and my mother followed, none of us stopping her. This was her stage, and she'd chosen to take it. The ballroom, alive with guests sipping wine, laughing, and posing before a pristine white floral backdrop, fell silent. Glasses paused, smiles vanished, and all eyes turned to Sophia as she staggered to the center. Her hair was tangled, her veil askew, her eyes red and streaked with mascara. The gown that had once dazzled now seemed to weigh her down. She stood, panting, her gaze sweeping the crowd like a cornered animal. Then she screamed, her voice echoing over the glittering tables and chandeliers. "You think you can humiliate me like this?" Sophia shrieked, her voice raw with fury and despair. "I gave everything for this day, months of planning, picking every flower, every glass to make it perfect. And now, because of a few texts, a few stupid words, you want to ruin me?" The room was frozen, the air heavy with shock. Guests exchanged glances, whispers starting to ripple, some setting down their drinks, their faces a mix of curiosity and disbelief. An older woman, likely a family friend, shook her head, hand over her mouth. Sophia's friends, who'd once worshipped her, stood still, avoiding her gaze. The murmurs grew, like waves breaking, and I knew Sophia's story was no longer a private scandal. James stepped forward, his movements deliberate, his tuxedo still sharp despite the loosened tie. He stopped a few feet from Sophia, his eyes cold and clear. "No one's ruining you, Sophia," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "You did that yourself. Those texts, your schemes, they're your doing, no one else's." Sophia shook her head wildly, tears streaming, her face contorted. "You love me, James," she cried, her voice shattering. "I did everything for our future. You can't abandon me over a few reckless words." Eleanor moved beside her son, her gaze cutting. "Future?" she repeated, her voice like ice. "You call plotting to take my family's wealth a future. Calling me a rich old lady and my son easy to manipulate, that's love. Sophia, you didn't want our family. You wanted our assets." A soft gasp spread through the crowd like a breeze through the vineyards. The guests were connecting the dots, their looks shifting to judgment. A man, perhaps James's colleague, shook his head, muttering to his neighbor. One of Sophia's friends lowered her eyes, unable to face her. Sophia spun, her eyes frantic, and then she saw me near the entrance. "It's you!" she screamed, pointing, her hand shaking. "Emma, you did this. You've always been jealous, always trying to tear me down. You made this up, turned everyone against me. You wanted to steal my wedding, my life." The murmurs grew louder, eyes turning to me, some curious, some skeptical. I felt their weight, but I wasn't afraid. I stepped forward, my heels clicking softly, the chandelier light catching my sapphire dress, making me stand out. I stopped near Sophia and met her gaze. "I didn't need to steal anything, Sophia," I said, my voice steady and clear, reaching every corner of the room. "I didn't need to tear you down. The truth outweighs any lie you can spin." Sophia stood frozen, her breath shallow, my words hitting her like a blow. The crowd was silent, waiting. Then, my mother staggered forward, her steps shaky, as if fighting to stay upright. "Sophia," she said, her voice small and broken, Did you really do those things?" Sophia whipped around, her eyes a storm of desperation and rage. "Mom, you're turning on me too. You, who always said I was your everything, are choosing Emma." My mother shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I didn't want to believe it, Sophia. But those texts, I can't pretend they don't exist. You hurt James, his family, and Emma." Sophia laughed, a bitter, almost unhinged sound. Emma's nothing. A nobody who's always been on the sidelines, always jealous, always wanting you to love her like you love me. She doesn't deserve it." I stood there, not angry, but with a cold clarity settling over me. Before I could respond, my father stepped forward, his eyes heavy but resolute. "That's enough, Sophia," he said, his voice low but commanding. "You don't get to talk about your sister like that. Emma is my daughter, and she deserves more than what you, your mother, and I have given her." The ballroom held its breath. Sophia stared at him, mouth agape, unable to speak. My mother gasped, clutching her chest as if his words had struck her. I stood there, my throat tight, not from pain, but from the overwhelming realization that, for the first time, my father was truly on my side. James, silent until now, spoke up. He pulled a white envelope from his jacket and held it up before Sophia. "This is the annulment paperwork," he said, his voice cold but clear. "And I've signed it. I don't want a future with someone who doesn't truly love me." Sophia staggered back as if struck. "James, you can't," she whispered, but her voice faded, dissolving into the air. The crowd murmured, some shaking their heads, others whispering, their eyes filled with judgment. Eleanor placed a hand on James's shoulder, her gaze softening as she looked at her son. "Let's go, James," she said, her voice gentle but firm. They turned, walking through the crowd, leaving Sophia alone in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by glittering chandeliers and opulent gowns. The woman who'd been the star, built on control and a flawless facade, was now just a solitary figure, the light around her extinguished. But just when I thought it was over, another scream echoed from the doorway. "Sophia, don't do it!" It was Lily, Sophia's best friend, who'd always been by her side at every party and plan. She ran in, her face pale, clutching her phone. "I just got your text. You said you'd do something drastic if everything fell apart. Please, Sophia, don't." The crowd froze, eyes snapping back to Sophia. She stood there, panting, her gaze wild as if teetering on the edge of a precipice. And I knew this climax wasn't over. What Sophia did next would shape not just her fate, but how this family and I face the future. The Napa Valley ballroom was cloaked in suffocating silence, as if the world itself was waiting for what came next. Sophia stood in the center, the bride who'd once been the star of her wedding, now a broken figure. Her blonde hair was tangled, her veil askew, her eyes red and streaked with mascara, her lavish gown a heavy burden dragging her down. Lily's scream, "Sophia, don't do it!" had stunned the crowd. Lily rushed in, pale and panicked, gripping her phone. "I got your text. You said you'd do something drastic if it all fell apart. Please, Sophia, don't." All eyes turned to Sophia, from strangers to former friends, from the Harper family to my parents. She stood there, breathing heavily, her gaze frantic, like someone on the brink. She looked at Lily, then the crowd, then back at me, her eyes a storm of desperation and resentment. "What do you all want from me?" she screamed, her voice raw, almost unhinged. "You want me to beg for forgiveness? To disappear? I did everything to build a better life, and now you judge me like I'm a monster." The crowd murmured, some shaking their heads, others whispering, their gazes heavy with judgment. I stood near the entrance, feeling every eye that glanced my way, but I wasn't afraid. I'd grown used to being sidelined, blamed, forgotten. But this time, I wouldn't stay silent. I stepped forward, my heels clicking softly, the chandelier light catching my sapphire dress, making me stand out in the ballroom. "Sophia," I said, my voice slow and clear, "no one wants you to disappear, but you can't keep blaming others for your own choices." Sophia laughed bitterly, tears streaming. "Choices? What do you know about choices, Emma? You, who's always been on the sidelines, always jealous, always trying to steal my light. You think you're better than me. You're nothing." Her words cut like knives, but they didn't hurt. I looked at her, not with anger, but with a cold clarity. "I don't need your light," I said, my voice carrying across the room. "I don't need to be the center of attention. I just wanted to be treated like a person, like part of this family. But you, Mom, and all these years decided I wasn't worth that." My mother, standing nearby, gasped, clutching her chest, tears rolling down her face. "Emma?" she whispered, her voice breaking, but I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on Sophia, who was trembling, as if her final layers of pretense had fallen away. Lily stepped forward, grabbing Sophia's hand, her voice shaking. "Sophia, stop. You don't need to hurt anyone else. That text, you said you'd do something dangerous. Please tell me it's not true." Sophia yanked her hand free, staggering back, her eyes darting as if searching for an escape. "Dangerous?" she echoed, her voice dripping with bitterness. "You think I'd hurt myself to make you all feel guilty? Or do you want that, so you can call me crazy?" She turned to James, her gaze pleading. "James, you know I'm not that person. You know I love you. Please, tell them." James stood there, the white envelope, his annulment papers still in hand. He looked at Sophia, his eyes no longer angry, only filled with a deep sadness. "I don't know you anymore, Sophia," he said, his voice low but clear. "The woman I loved isn't the one who wrote those texts, who planned to deceive me, my family, and even your own. I can't do this." Sophia stumbled back, as if his words had knocked the air from her. The crowd was silent, the murmurs fading, like a breeze dying in the vineyards. Eleanor, beside James, placed a hand on his shoulder, her gaze soft but resolute. "Let's go, James," she said, and they turned, walking through the crowd, leaving Sophia alone in the ballroom. But then, unexpectedly, my father stepped forward, his movements slow but heavy. He stopped before Sophia, his eyes no longer angry, but filled with a profound pain. "Sophia," he said, his voice rough, "you've gone too far. You hurt James, his family, and Emma. But most of all, you hurt yourself. I don't know when you became this person, but I know I'm to blame. I didn't see it." Sophia looked at him, tears spilling, but she didn't respond. She stood there panting as if all her strength had drained away. My mother moved closer, her hands trembling, but this time she didn't embrace Sophia as she always had. "My girl," she said, her voice breaking. "I was wrong. I thought I was protecting you, but I neglected Emma and I didn't see who you really were. I'm sorry. To both of you." And I stood there, my throat tight, not from anger, but from my mother's apology, something I'd never thought I'd hear. But it didn't bring relief, only clarity. An apology couldn't erase the years I'd been overlooked, couldn't heal the scars this family had left. Sophia, now utterly alone, looked around, her eyes no longer filled with resentment, only emptiness. "You win," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You want me to be the villain? Then I'm the villain." She turned, pushing through the crowd, her gown trailing behind, and disappeared through the main doors, leaving the ballroom in a heavy silence. The crowd began to murmur, but I didn't care. I turned and walked out of the ballroom, back to the lavish hallway where it all began. I sank into the red velvet chair, gazing out at the vineyard stretching under the sunset. The music in the ballroom had stopped, leaving only the soft whisper of the breeze. I pulled an old photo from my purse, a family Christmas picture from when I was 16. Sophia was in the center, in a bright red dress, beaming. My mother sat beside her, a proud hand on her shoulder, and me, off to the side, half hidden by the Christmas tree. I stared at the photo for a long time, then folded it and tucked it back into my purse. I didn't need to force myself into a frame that wasn't meant for me. My phone buzzed, a text from my mother. "Emma, I'm sorry. I want to talk, just you and me." I looked at the screen but didn't reply. I wasn't angry. I simply didn't need it anymore. That night, I drove away from Napa Valley, the resort's lights fading in my rearview mirror. I didn't know where Sophia would go or what she'd do after this. But I knew one thing. I'd found freedom. Not in my mother's apology, not in my father's acknowledgement, but in the moment I decided my worth didn't depend on their validation. I was Emma Wilson, and for the first time, I chose myself.